We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1891 and the solemn story of Ellen Donworth. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. In the rolling green countryside of County Limerick, Ireland, life in the late 19th century was governed by the seasons and ancient traditions. For a young woman like 18-year-old Ellen Donworth, life was one of hard work and simple expectations. She was a domestic servant from a humble family, her days filled with labor, her world largely confined to the small villages and rural laneways of her home. It was a quiet existence, lived far from the industrial clamor of the era's great cities. Yet the tranquility of this landscape would soon be shattered by an act of violence that would not only devastate a community, but also mark a turning point in the history of criminal justice. Sunday, June 21st, 1891, began as an ordinary day for Ellen. She made the familiar journey to the nearby market town of Kilmallock to sell butter and eggs, a common task for a young woman in her position. After conducting her business, she would have purchased a few necessities, perhaps stopping to speak with friends and neighbors. As the long summer evening began to descend, Ellen started her walk home towards the village of Brewery. Witnesses saw her on the road carrying a tin can which she used to bring home buttermilk. She was alone, walking a path she had traveled countless times before. The fields were quiet, the air was still, and there was no sense of impending danger. This unremarkable journey, a routine part of her life's rhythm, would tragically be her last. As dusk settled over County Limerick, Ellen Donworth vanished from sight. The following morning, a local man made a horrifying discovery. In a field near an ancient earthen fort known locally as the Rath, he found the body of Ellen Donworth. The scene told a story of a brutal and desperate struggle. Ellen had been viciously assaulted and murdered, her head bearing the marks of a savage attack. The Royal Irish Constabulary were summoned to the location, and an investigation began immediately. The pastoral tranquility of the field was now a place of grim evidence and unspoken horror. Lying nearby was Ellen's tin can, a poignant and silent testament to her interrupted journey home. The news of the murder spread quickly through the tight-knit community, bringing with it a wave of fear and suspicion. This was not the work of a stranger. The location and nature of the crime suggested the killer was one of their own.
The Royal Irish Constabulary, or RIC, began their investigation by focusing on the local population. They questioned residents and farm laborers, trying to piece together a timeline of Ellen's final hours and identify anyone who was seen near the Rath on Sunday evening. Suspicions soon began to coalesce around one man, William Heffernan, a 28-year-old farmer who lived in the area. Heffernan was known in the community for his brutish demeanor and a volatile temper. More importantly, several witnesses placed him in the vicinity of the crime scene around the time Ellen would have been walking home. While there was no immediate direct evidence linking him to the murder, the constables felt that Heffernan's reputation and his proximity to the location warranted a much closer look. He was brought in for questioning.
When William Heffernan was confronted by the RIC, his appearance immediately deepened their suspicions. On his face were several fresh, deep scratches, the kind that might be made by a person fighting for their life. Furthermore, his clothing was marked with dark, reddish-brown stains that appeared to be blood. When questioned about this incriminating evidence, Heffernan offered a ready explanation. He claimed that he had been handling a difficult calf on his farm and that the animal had scratched his face. The stains on his clothes, he insisted, were not human blood, but the blood of an animal he had been tending to. It was a plausible story for a farmer, a simple explanation for the damning physical signs. But the investigators were skeptical. Heffernan's story seemed too convenient, and the evidence on his body and clothes seemed to point towards a violent human encounter, not a struggle with livestock.
The investigators were at a crucial juncture. They had a strong suspect and compelling yet circumstantial physical evidence. In 1891, however, forensic science was in its infancy. Police work relied almost entirely on eyewitness testimony, confessions, and tangible evidence like murder weapons. Proving that the stains on Heffernan's clothes were human blood, let alone Ellen Donworth, was beyond the capabilities of a rural Irish police force. But the local doctor, John O'Brien, and the RIC leadership made a forward-thinking decision. They decided to seek out a higher level of expertise. They carefully packaged Heffernan's blood-stained clothing and a sample of blood taken from the crime scene and sent them to London. The recipient was Dr. Charles Hubert Bond, a pathologist on the cutting edge of a new and revolutionary field, the scientific analysis of blood.
At his laboratory in London, Dr. Bond subjected the stains on William Heffernan's clothing to the most advanced analysis available at the time. Using a combination of microscopy to examine the blood cells and spectroscopy to analyze how the blood absorbed light, he was able to unlock the secrets held within the dried stains. His conclusions, while not definitive by today's standards, were groundbreaking for the era. First, he confirmed that the stains were indeed blood. Second, and most critically, he determined that it was mammalian blood. This finding directly contradicted Heffernan's claims that the stains could have come from a bird or fish common on farms. While the science of the day could not distinguish between human blood and that of other mammals like a calf, Dr. Bond's analysis demonstrated that Heffernan's story was, at best, questionable. He had established a scientific link, showing the blood was consistent with human blood and casting serious doubt on the suspect's alibi. The trial of William Heffernan for the murder of Ellen Donworth was a landmark event. The prosecution, representing the Crown, built its case on a powerful interlocking chain of circumstantial evidence. They presented witnesses who established Heffernan's presence near the Rath on the evening of the murder. They called neighbors who testified to his aggressive character and his history of violent outbursts. They pointed to the scratches on his face, arguing they were the marks of his victim's final, desperate struggle. And then they presented their most novel and powerful piece of evidence, the expert testimony of Dr. Charles Bond. The prosecution argued that this new scientific analysis of the bloodstains on Heffernan's clothing systematically dismantled his alibi and placed him at the heart of the violent encounter that ended Ellen Donworth's life.
The defense fought back vigorously. Heffernan's counsel argued that the state's case was built on nothing more than suspicion and coincidence.
They emphasized that no one had actually seen their client attack Ellen Donworth and that there was no murder weapon. They fiercely attacked the scientific testimony, portraying it as a new and unreliable technique, a form of speculative science that had no place in a court of law and should not be used to send a man to the gallows. The jury was left to weigh the power of traditional circumstantial evidence against the claims of a new and complex scientific field. After deliberating, they reached their conclusion. They found the cumulative weight of the evidence, bolstered by the scientific testimony, to be compelling. William Heffernan was found guilty of murder. The judge, donning the black cap, sentenced him to death by hanging. In the final weeks of his life, facing his own mortality, William Heffernan's resolve is said to have broken. According to reports, shortly before his execution, he made a full confession to a priest, admitting his guilt in the murder of Ellen Donworth. On January 5, 1892, he was hanged at Limerick jail. While justice was served for Ellen, the case's true legacy extends far beyond that single verdict. It stands as a pivotal moment in the history of forensic investigation. It was one of the very first times that blood analysis was used successfully in a British or Irish court to secure a murder conviction. The work of Dr. Bond and the foresight of the Royal Irish Constabulary represented a crucial step away from the uncertainties of the past and towards a future where science would become one of law enforcement's most powerful tools in the pursuit of truth. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.